The vineyards of Napa stretched in soft gold beneath the November sun, the hills lined with quiet rows of vines that had long fallen into their winter sleep. Inside the stone villa overlooking the valley, Victoria Hayes stood at the window, her reflection merging with the glass, a faint, elegant silhouette surrounded by silence. She was 63 now, a widow for nearly a decade, and the house that once held laughter and piano music had grown still. For 8 years, Thanksgiving had come and gone without a single knock on her door. The first time Ethan had canceled, he'd sounded regretful. "Mom, Sienna's family really wants us in L.A. this year. We'll visit for Christmas instead." She had smiled, pretending not to mind. The second year it was, "Sienna's expecting. Traveling isn't easy right now." Then it became, "We're hosting at our place. Maybe next time, okay?" By the fourth Thanksgiving, even the invitations had stopped. Victoria had kept the tradition alive anyway. She set the table for 3 polished silver crystal glasses, and her late husband's chair left untouched. She cooked Ethan's favorite cranberry glaze and sent him photos with little notes. Most years there was no reply. On the good ones, a short text appeared. "Thanks, Mom. Busy day." She told herself they were building their own life, that children grow away from their parents. Yet the photographs online told a crueler story. Ethan smiling beside Santa in a house Victoria had helped them buy, surrounded by her in-laws, holding glasses of champagne under a chandelier that looked painfully familiar. It was one she had chosen for them years ago. By the 6th Thanksgiving, she stopped decorating. By the 7th, she stopped pretending. The 8th one, last year, was the one that broke her. She sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset burn over the valley, the air sweet with crushed grapes. She had sent them a handwritten letter that week. No guilt, no pleading. Only a quiet wish that they were well. When no answer came, she tore up the address book, slipped the wedding photo of Ethan and Sienna back into its frame, and whispered, "Enough." Since then, she had filled her days with small rituals, pruning the roses, tasting new blends at the winery, attending charity luncheons where people still called her Mrs. Hayes. She smiled, listened, and came home to her silence. But in that silence, there was also peace, until this year when the calendar turned again to November, and the phone rang unexpectedly. "Hi, Mom." Ethan's voice, warm but unfamiliar, filled the line. Behind him, she could hear laughter, Sienna's unmistakable and bright. "We were thinking, maybe it's time we visited." Victoria's hand trembled slightly around the receiver. Outside, the vineyard shimmered under a pale sun, the air thick with the scent of earth after rain. For 8 years, she had waited for that sentence, and now that it came, it felt less like love and more like a storm on the horizon. She smiled anyway, her voice steady. "Of course, Ethan. You're both welcome any time." When she hung up, the house was still again. Only the wind moved, brushing against the vines like a warning. Victoria turned back to the window, the reflection of her face calm and unreadable. After 8 empty Thanksgivings, her son was finally coming home, and somehow, deep inside, she knew peace would not follow him through that door. Winter in Napa had its own kind of beauty, quiet, silver mornings, and fog that rolled in from the valley like a gentle veil. Victoria woke early most days, fed the cat that had adopted her 2 summers ago, and took long walks between the bare vines. The air smelled of oak and cold soil. It was a life without noise, without expectation. And for the first time in years, she was learning the difference between loneliness and peace. After that 8th Thanksgiving, something inside her had simply stopped. She deleted Ethan's number from her favorites, unsubscribed from Sienna's endless social updates, and packed the old photo albums into the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. There would be no more cards, no more gifts, no more pretending that love could be bought with patience. The world she had built for her son now belonged to someone else, and she finally accepted that. The quiet days settled around her like soft linen. She began sketching again, small watercolors of the valley she once painted for joy, not for show. On Sundays, she drove her old Mercedes down to St. Helena, bought croissants from the bakery, and talked briefly with the owners who still remembered her and her late husband. They always asked about Ethan, and she always smiled, saying, "He's doing well." It was easier than explaining the truth. By early spring, the house had begun to feel alive again, her music playing softly, sunlight filtering through clean glass, everything in its place. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang. Victoria wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door and froze. Ethan stood there, tall and tense, a forced smile on his lips. Behind him, Sienna, designer coat, oversized sunglasses, red nails tapping the handle of a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase. Another 3 suitcases waited by the steps, lined neatly like soldiers. Surprise! Sienna chirped, stepping forward before Victoria could speak. "We thought we'd come see you for a few days. Check in. It's been forever." Her perfume filled the doorway, sweet and expensive, almost suffocating. Victoria blinked, trying to mask her confusion. "I see that," she said softly. "You brought quite a bit for a short visit." "Oh, these." Sienna laughed, waving a hand dismissively. "Just a few essentials. You know how I am." Ethan stepped inside without waiting to be invited, setting his suitcase by the staircase. "We missed you, Mom," he said. His voice was low, rehearsed. Victoria watched them move through her foyer, Sienna glancing at the furniture, trailing her fingers along the marble counter as if taking inventory. The rhythm of the house shifted, subtly but unmistakably. She forced a smile, the kind that once smoothed family dinners. "Well," she murmured, "it's lovely to see you both. Let me have Maria prepare the guest room." Sienna's lips curved into a polite, practiced grin. "Oh, actually," she said lightly, looking around, "we were thinking the upstairs suite might be better. The one with the vineyard view? It's brighter." For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick, awkward, electric. Victoria's hand tightened on the doorknob. That room had been hers and Richard's. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Sienna, really looked at her, and beneath the perfect smile and designer polish, she saw something cold, calculating. "Of course," Victoria finally said, her tone even. "Make yourselves comfortable." As she turned away, a strange calm settled over her. The quiet she had worked so hard to build was gone, replaced by a feeling she hadn't known in years, the sense that a storm had already entered her home, smiling. The morning sun poured through the kitchen's tall windows, washing the marble countertops in soft light. Victoria sat at the breakfast table with her coffee, its steam curling upward in thin, fragile threads. Across from her, Sienna scrolled through her phone, perfectly manicured nails clicking against the glass, while Ethan silently chewed his toast, eyes fixed on the plate as if it held answers. They had been there for 3 days now, and Victoria was still trying to understand why. The few days Sienna had promised had stretched into something else, something that now carried the weight of permanence. The guest room was filled with their clothes. Sienna's shoes lined the hallway. Ethan had taken over the study, claiming he needed space for work calls. Victoria folded the newspaper and looked up. "So," she said quietly, "how long do you plan to stay?" Sienna looked up from her phone, smiling the kind of smile that meant she'd been waiting for the question. "Oh, didn't Ethan tell you?" she said, feigning surprise. "We actually sold the house in Connecticut. Closed the deal last week." Victoria blinked. "You sold the house?" "Ma'am," Sienna said, pouring herself more coffee as if discussing the weather. It was too far from everything. Too quiet. "We figured it's time for a change." She paused, meeting Victoria's gaze, her tone soft but deliberate. "And honestly, it just makes sense to stay here for a while. Family should be together, right?" Ethan shifted in his chair, avoiding his mother's eyes. "It's just until we find something new," he murmured, but the words sounded hollow, like lines he didn't believe himself. Sienna stood up, smoothing the silk of her blouse as she began to stroll around the kitchen. "This place is stunning, of course," she said, her voice light, assessing. "But it could use some updates. Maybe brighter paint, new fixtures, modern lighting. Something fresh. I know a designer in L.A. "Who could? This house was designed by Richard Hayes," Victoria interrupted, her tone calm but firm. "Every detail was chosen together." "Oh, I know," Sienna said sweetly, waving her hand. "It's beautiful. Just dated. Times change, right?" She drifted into the living room, running her fingers along the piano's polished edge. Then through the drapes, the art, the books, inspecting everything the way one might appraise property before making an offer. Victoria watched her, a chill creeping into her chest. When Sienna reached the staircase, she glanced upward toward the master suite and smiled. "That upstairs room," she said, turning back to Victoria, "the one with the balcony and the vineyard view, it's lovely. Don't you think it might be better for us to use that one while we're here? The lighting's perfect for content, and Ethan needs space for his calls." Victoria felt the words like a blade. That room had once held her life. The scent of her husband's cologne still lingered faintly in the cedar wardrobe. The morning light that used to wake them both still filtered through those same lace curtains. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Ethan, hoping, just once, he would find the courage to speak. But he kept his eyes on the floor, his silence giving Sienna all the permission she needed. Sienna smiled wider, as if the matter were already settled. "We'll move our things up later today," she said. "Don't worry. I'll have the cleaning lady freshen it up. It'll be perfect." Victoria set down her cup, her heartbeat steady despite the storm building inside her. She had spent a lifetime reading between the lines of contracts and polite conversations, and she knew when something had shifted from hospitality to invasion. This wasn't a visit. This was a takeover, quiet, practiced, and already in motion. She stood, smoothing the folds of her cardigan. "Of course," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Whatever makes you comfortable." Sienna beamed, satisfied, and Victoria turned toward the window. Outside, the vines glowed under the morning sun, their roots deep in the earth, immovable, patient. She would need to be the same. Within a week, the rhythm of the house no longer belonged to Victoria. The soundscape had changed, her quiet mornings replaced by the echo of Sienna's heels across the marble floor, the click of her phone camera, and the high-pitched tones of her laughter during video calls. It was astonishing how quickly someone could rearrange an entire life without moving a single wall. The staff noticed first. Maria, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 15 years, started coming to Victoria in whispers. "Mrs. Hayes, she told me to throw away the drapes from the study," she murmured one morning. "So they were dusty and outdated. But you chose them yourself. Didn't you?" Victoria only nodded, her throat tightening. It wasn't just the curtains. Sienna had ordered the dining table to be refinished in a lighter tone, moved the art collection into storage, and replaced the soft jazz that once played through the speakers with Sienna's curated playlists, shallow pop songs that turned the villa into an echo chamber of artificial cheer. When Victoria finally confronted her about it, Sienna laughed as though the question were absurd. "Oh, Victoria, please. I'm just making the space livable." It felt so museum-like. You deserve something vibrant, something alive. Alive. That word stung, because nothing about the house felt alive anymore. It felt staged, like one of those homes Sienna flaunted online. The warmth Richard had built into every corner was gone, replaced by sterile perfection. By the second week, even the staff began to treat Victoria differently. Sienna had spoken to them privately, claiming concern for Victoria's well-being. Soon, Maria began repeating things twice, speaking louder, slower, as if addressing someone fragile. The gardener stopped asking for her input on the roses. The driver insisted on confirming her appointments with Sienna before taking her anywhere. It was subtle at first, but Victoria felt it tightening around her, a web of control disguised as care. Then came the rumors. She overheard Sienna on the phone in the living room one night, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Yes, it's been hard," she said. "She's not the same since Richard passed. Sometimes she forgets things, leaves the stove on, misplaces her keys. We're just trying to keep her safe." Victoria froze behind the doorway, the words slicing through her like cold glass. None of it was true. She hadn't forgotten a single thing, except, perhaps, what it felt like to trust her own family. The next morning, Ethan mentioned it casually over breakfast. "Mom, maybe you should let Sienna handle the bills for now, just until you feel more rested." "Rested," she repeated, her voice calm but icy. "I'm perfectly capable." "Ethan." He sighed, not meeting her eyes. "I know, Mom. It's just Sienna's better at organizing things." And that was it. Her son's quiet surrender. The man she had raised, defended and loved, now sat across from her, echoing his wife's words like a script. That night, Victoria walked through the house alone. The scent of new paint lingered in the halls. Sienna had replaced her late husband's portrait with a modern abstract canvas, soulless, expensive, meaningless. Even the bedroom upstairs no longer felt like hers. Sienna's perfume filled the air, sweet and suffocating. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching her own reflection fade in the window glass. Her home, her sanctuary, her life's work, now a stage for someone else's performance. Outside, the vineyard stretched into darkness, silent witnesses to her humiliation. She realized with a slow, cold certainty that she was no longer the mistress of Hayes' vineyard estate. She was merely its ghost, moving quietly through rooms that no longer remembered her name. Dinner had once been Victoria's favorite part of the day, a quiet ritual she and Richard had shared with candlelight, soft jazz, and conversation that lingered long after the plates were cleared. Now, the same table felt like a battleground. The candles were gone, replaced by the bright, sterile glow of Sienna's designer pendant lamps. Across the table, Sienna's laughter cut through the air like glass. They were halfway through the meal when Victoria finally spoke. Her tone was even, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "Ethan," she said, setting down her fork, "I've been patient. I've tried to welcome you both. But this isn't a visit anymore, is it?" Ethan stiffened, exchanging a glance with Sienna. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "You sold your home, moved into mine, and started changing everything I built here," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "This house was your father's dream, not a prop for your wife's social media." Sienna's smile faltered. "Victoria," she began sweetly, "you're overreacting. We're just helping. You've been living all alone out here. It's not healthy." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I've managed just fine for 10 years without supervision." The word hung in the air, sharp, deliberate. Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. "Mom, Sienna's just trying to make things easier for you." "Easier?" Victoria repeated, her voice rising for the first time. "I worked 3 jobs to get you through Stanford. I built this life from nothing after your father died. I paid for your first house when you couldn't qualify for a loan. And now, after everything, you come into my home and treat me like I'm the one who doesn't belong here." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sienna's expression hardened, the charm slipping away. "This is exactly what I was worried about," she said softly, turning to Ethan. "She's becoming unstable again. The paranoia, the mood swings, enough." Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't twist this." But Sienna's tone remained calm, calculated. "No one's twisting anything. We love you, Victoria. We just think it's time someone looked after you properly." You forget things, you repeat yourself. I forget nothing, Victoria snapped. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. Ma, maybe she's right. Maybe a little help isn't the worst thing. The knife of betrayal slid in cleanly this time. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her pulse steady, her face expressionless. She looked at her son, the man she'd once carried through nights of fever, the boy who'd cried when he got his first rejection letter, and she realized he was gone. Sienna reached for her wine glass, the red liquid catching the light. We're just thinking about the future, she said smoothly. Yours and ours. Victoria didn't reply. She simply gathered her plate, carried it to the sink, and washed it in silence while they kept eating. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind had gone still. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, she sat by the window, the vineyard shrouded in darkness. The air smelled faintly of lavender and rain. For the first time, she saw their plan clearly, the way Sienna's manipulations aligned with Ethan's weakness, the way they were closing in. Victoria, who had built everything from loss and silence, understood something vital that night. She wasn't losing her mind. She was being erased. And if they wanted a war, she would give them one. The storm began quietly, not with thunder, but with a phone call. It came late one morning, while Victoria was pruning the rose bushes behind the villa, her gloves stained with soil, the sky dim and low. The number was familiar, Cloud, her former driver. He'd worked for the family for nearly 20 years before retiring to a small house near Yountville. His voice carried a tension she hadn't heard before. Mrs. Hayes, he whispered, skipping any greeting. I saw Ethan yesterday. He was in town, at the law offices of Beckman and Reed. He wasn't alone. Sienna was with him. Victoria frowned, brushing dirt from her gloves. That's strange. He didn't mention anything about business. Cloud hesitated. It didn't look like business. I used to drive clients there, remember? Beckman and Reed specialize in elder law, guardianships, estates, power of attorney filings. And then today, I overheard someone at the cafe near the medical center say he was asking about a psychiatric evaluation process, something about proving mental incapacity. For a moment, Victoria couldn't breathe. Are you certain? She asked, her voice steady though her pulse thundered in her ears. I wish I wasn't, Cloud said quietly, but I know what I saw. When the call ended, Victoria stood frozen in the garden. The hum of bees and the distant whisper of the wind through the vines felt unreal, too calm for the storm unraveling inside her. Guardianship, mental incapacity. It was the kind of legal maneuver reserved for the sick and the senile. But she was neither. She was lucid, entirely so. That afternoon, she went upstairs to her late husband's study, the one room Sienna hadn't yet dared to touch. The desk still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. She powered on Richard's old computer and began searching through her own financial and medical records. It didn't take long before she found the first crack, an email notification from her insurance provider, confirming a request for medical records to be released to Dr. William Richardson. The name meant nothing to her. There was no such doctor listed at the Napa Valley Medical Center. She checked twice, 3 times. The physician ID was fabricated. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled further. Attached to the request was a scanned consent form, complete with her forged signature. She printed it, laying the papers out on the desk under the sunlight. Then came the email thread, tucked inside Ethan's shared account on the home network, which he must have thought she didn't know how to access. It was between Ethan, Sienna, and someone using the address w.richardsonconsult@protonmail.com. Sienna had written, once the evaluation is filed, we can submit the guardianship petition. Ethan will be named the primary caregiver. Once that's approved, we can move forward with selling the property, ideally within 6 weeks. I've already contacted an agent in St. Helena. Ethan's reply was hesitant, almost pleading. Are you sure this is necessary? She's not crazy, Sienna. Just stubborn. Sienna's response came minutes later. Don't start doubting now. You know what's at stake. Once this is done, we'll finally be free. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her hands cold against the wood. The betrayal was complete, methodical, planned down to the last document. This wasn't just greed. It was premeditated theft wrapped in affection. For a long time, she simply stared out the window at the hills. The light had changed, turning the vineyard gold again, serene and endless. How could a landscape remain so beautiful while her world collapsed in silence? Eventually, she gathered every printed page into a folder and locked it in the desk drawer. Her heart was broken, yes, but her mind had never been sharper. The shock burned cleanly into focus, carving clarity from pain. She now knew exactly what she was facing. This was no misunderstanding, no emotional distance that could be mended. It was a conspiracy, and if she stayed quiet, they would erase her completely. Victoria Hayes, once a wife and mother, now understood her new role. The woman they thought was powerless, the woman they believed they could silence. And that was their first mistake. For the next few days, Victoria moved through the house like a ghost, quiet, watchful, unseen. Sienna believed she had broken her, that the weight of humiliation had left the older woman fragile and resigned. It was exactly what Victoria wanted her to believe. Each morning, she followed the same routine. Tea on the veranda, a brief walk through the vineyard, polite smiles at breakfast. When Sienna spoke to her as if addressing a child, Victoria only nodded. When Ethan suggested she rest more, she agreed. The mask of frailty became her shield, her invisibility. At night, when the villa finally went still, she came alive. She began collecting evidence. Every forged document, every email, every sign of manipulation. The printer in Richard's study hummed softly as she printed copies of the falsified medical forms and the correspondence with the fake psychiatrist. She labeled each file neatly, sliding them into folders marked insurance, legal, medical. Her precision was almost surgical. The next step was finding allies. She called Daniel Lawson, the family's longtime attorney who had handled Richard's estate years ago. He was startled to hear from her, but listened carefully as she explained everything. Her voice calm, but edged with fire. Guardianship fraud is serious, Victoria, he said gravely. If what you're saying is true, we can stop them before it reaches court, but we'll need proof. Hard evidence. I already have it, she replied, and I'll get more. Daniel promised discretion. His firm in San Francisco would quietly review the documents and prepare a preliminary injunction to freeze any property transfer. Next, she called Dr. Elena Martinez, her real physician at the Napa Valley Medical Center. They met in person 2 days later under the pretext of a routine checkup. When Victoria showed her the forged reports bearing the name of Dr. Richardson, the doctor's face turned pale. This signature isn't mine, and there's no Richardson on our staff, Dr. Martinez said. This is criminal forgery. Victoria nodded. Then I'll need your official report confirming that, and a statement declaring my mental competence. You'll have it by tomorrow, the doctor promised. Her final call was to Isabel Chin, her oldest friend, now working at the U.S. consulate in San Francisco. Isabel had always been resourceful, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal. Send me everything, she said without hesitation. If they've been moving money overseas, I'll find it. People like Sienna always leave a trail. By the end of the week, Victoria had built a network around her, quiet, unseen, and far stronger than the people living under her roof realized. She continued to play her role perfectly. She let Sienna think she was losing her memory, that she had grown dependent. She allowed Ethan to believe she was softening, forgiving. Every sigh, every trembling hand, every misplaced key was deliberate. One evening, as Sienna laughed loudly in the living room, showing off her new decor to friends on a video call. Victoria stood in the hallway unseen. The reflection in the mirror showed not a frail woman, but someone calculating, awake. For weeks they had rewritten her story, painting her as senile, weak, obsolete. But she had just written her first chapter of resistance. The pieces were in motion now, and though her enemies slept soundly upstairs, Victoria Hayes was wide awake, patient, precise, and ready for war. The morning of the family meeting arrived bright and deceptively calm. The valley below the terrace shimmered in sunlight, but inside Hayes' vineyard estate, the air was thick with something colder, the scent of manipulation dressed as concern. Sienna had arranged the meeting in the living room, where she'd replaced Victoria's antique rug with a modern white one to lighten the mood. The coffee table was neatly stacked with documents and a sleek silver pen. Ethan sat stiffly on the couch, his eyes darting between his wife and his mother. "Mom," Sienna began with an overly warm tone, "we wanted to talk to you about something important, something that's for your own good." Victoria sat opposite them, poised, composed. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Sienna slid a stack of papers across the table. "It's just a few documents," she said sweetly. "A power of attorney. It'll make things easier. You won't have to worry about taxes, medical forms, or legal nonsense anymore. Ethan and I can handle everything for you." Victoria looked down at the papers, scanning the crisp black letters. At the bottom of the first page, a blank space waited for her signature, next to Sienna's name as primary agent, Ethan's as secondary. The betrayal was inked in elegant legal language. "Of course," Sienna continued, her voice syrupy smooth, "this doesn't change anything. You'll still have full access to your funds, your home, your decisions. It's just a precaution, given, well, your recent forgetfulness." Ethan flinched at the word, but said nothing. Victoria's gaze lifted from the papers to her son. "Is that what you think I am now? Forgetful?" "Mom, please don't make this harder," Ethan murmured. "We're just trying to help." Sienna reached out, patting Victoria's hand with mock affection. "Once this is signed, we can also arrange your transfer to Meadowlark, a wonderful assisted living community in Sonoma. They have gardens, gourmet meals, even wine tastings. You'd love it." For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then Victoria smiled, soft, almost indulgent. "You're right, Sienna. It does sound perfect." Ethan looked up in surprise. "So you'll sign it?" Victoria nodded slowly. "Of course. But before I do, there's something you should know." She reached into the folder beside her and pulled out a stack of neatly printed documents. "I wanted to make sure everything was in order before signing away my life," she said lightly. "So I did a little research of my own." Sienna's smile froze. "These are certified copies," Victoria continued, sliding the papers across the table. "Marriage licenses, death certificates, police reports." She leaned forward slightly. "You see, I couldn't find much under the name Sienna Brooks. But under your original name, Leanne Morrison, there was plenty." Ethan's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Victoria's tone remained calm, her eyes locked on Sienna's. "Your wife, Ethan, was married twice before you. Both husbands died unexpectedly, and both left her everything they owned." She paused, letting the words settle like poison. "One was a car accident, the other, a fall from a balcony in Santa Barbara. I called the detective who worked the second case. He remembered her." Sienna's face drained of color. "This is absurd," she hissed. "You're delusional." Victoria smiled fondly. "Perhaps. But the police didn't think, so when I sent them copies of the toxicology report you forged under one of your former names. And neither did my lawyer." Ethan turned to his wife, his voice cracking. "Is this true?" Sienna's hands trembled slightly, her composure slipping. She's trying to divide us. Ethan, can't you see? This is her dementia talking. She doesn't have dementia, Victoria interrupted sharply. Dr. Martinez confirmed it. The only illness in this room is greed, and I'm done letting it breathe my air. She rose to her feet. The sunlight framed her like a portrait, her shadow stretching long across the rug. Now, she said, her tone measured and final, if you'll excuse me, I have a vineyard to tend to, one that still remembers who planted it. Ethan sat motionless, staring at the papers. Sienna's hands clenched at her sides, rage flickering behind her polished mask. The meeting was over, though no one said it. Only the wind outside dared to move, carrying with it the faint scent of crushed grapes and the unmistakable taste of power shifting hands. The silence that followed the confrontation was heavy, almost tangible. Sienna's eyes darted to Ethan, searching for rescue, but he sat frozen, his hands limp against his knees. The color had drained from his face. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her poise unshaken, her voice calm as the air before a storm. I understand you might doubt me, she said softly, her gaze sweeping over them both. So let's make this easier. Let's deal in facts. She reached for another folder resting beside her chair. This one thick, marked with the blue insignia of the Napa Valley Medical Center. The rustle of paper was the only sound as she drew out several printed reports and laid them neatly across the table. These are my actual medical evaluations, Victoria said. All signed by Dr. Elena Martinez, my attending physician for the past 6 years. You'll notice there's no mention of dementia, memory loss, or incapacity. In fact, she lifted one of the reports. Dr. Martinez's statement here explicitly declares that I am, quote, fully competent, mentally and physically. Ethan leaned forward, reading the header of the first page. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. This can't be right. Richardson said, there is no DR. Richardson, Victoria interrupted smoothly. He's a fabrication. A ghost you both paid for through a shell account. I tracked the payment. It was wired from your joint checking account 3 weeks ago to a consulting firm in Reno that doesn't exist. Sienna's lips parted, but no sound came out. Victoria set the papers aside and opened her laptop. And since you've both become so fond of documentation, she continued, her tone almost polite, perhaps you'll appreciate the rest. She pressed play. The living room filled with the tinny sound of Sienna's voice, recorded late one evening. The same tone Victoria had once mistaken for charm, now dripping with venom. Just a little Ambien in her tea. It's harmless. We need her to look disoriented, Ethan. Once the medical report's filed, the rest will be easy. Ethan's voice followed, low and uneasy. I don't like this, Sienna. What if something happens to her? Nothing will happen. Stop being dramatic. Do you want your inheritance or not? Victoria closed the laptop, slowly, letting the silence fall again. The sound of that recording hung in the room like smoke, impossible to clear. She turned her gaze to Ethan. Ambien. 4-6 nights in a row. You thought I wouldn't notice when the teapot smelled different. I kept every cup, every residue sample. Dr. Martinez ran the tests herself. They all came back positive. Sienna pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the rug. You can't prove those were my words, she snapped. You could have faked that recording. Victoria didn't even blink. The timestamp is embedded in your own home Wi-Fi logs. You were on a video call that same night, using the same device. Do you want me to play the video too? She didn't need to. The color in Sienna's face told her the answer. From her briefcase, Victoria withdrew one final envelope. The seal of the Superior Court of California gleamed in gold. She placed it on the table with quiet precision. This, she said, is a restraining order, effective immediately. You are both prohibited from accessing my home, my accounts, or any assets held under the Hayes name. The court has already approved a temporary freeze on all joint property transfers. Daniel Lawson filed it this morning. Sienna's expression shattered. You went to a judge. I went to justice, Victoria replied simply. The kind that doesn't shout, it arrives prepared. Ethan buried his face in his hands. His voice cracked as he whispered, Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. No, she said quietly. You just didn't mean to get caught. Sienna stood abruptly, fury overtaking panic. You can't throw us out. This house belongs to all of us. Victoria's voice turned to ice. This house was built by Richard Hayes. Every brick, every beam bears his name and mine. The deeds are clear, and they will remain so. You have 1 hour to gather your things. Neither of them moved. Victoria watched them both, their silence, their fear, the collapse of their illusion, and felt something inside her settle. Not joy, not even triumph, just certainty. As she turned toward the window, the last light of evening spilled across the vineyard, warm and steady. The vines swayed in the breeze, like witnesses to her quiet victory. The truth was now written, recorded, and sealed. The ghosts that had haunted her home were finally being evicted. Chaos erupted the moment Victoria placed the court envelope on the table. Sienna's calm facade finally cracked. Her pupils darted wildly, searching for a way out of the room, of the truth of herself. You can't do this to us, she shrieked, her voice trembling somewhere between rage and fear. This is harassment. You're insane. Victoria didn't flinch. She stood by the window, the late afternoon light outlining her silhouette like gold drawn in steel. No, Sienna, she said quietly. I'm lucid. Painfully so. Ethan rose from the couch, his movements sluggish, defeated. Please, Mom, this has gotten out of control. Let's just talk. Talk? Victoria turned to him, her eyes sharp but calm. You plotted to steal everything your father and I built. You sat beside a woman who drugged me and forged my medical records. You didn't come here to talk. Ethan, you came to take. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words dissolved in shame. Sienna, however, wasn't done fighting. She grabbed her purse, yanked it open, and began stuffing papers inside. We're leaving, she spat. And when our lawyer gets involved, you'll regret this. Victoria stepped forward, her presence suddenly commanding the entire room. You won't make it that far. Sienna froze halfway to the door. What did you just say? Victoria's voice softened to a near whisper, yet it carried through the room like a verdict. I know your secret. Those 3 words hit Sienna harder than any scream could have. Her face drained of color, her breath catching. You, what are you talking about? She stammered. Victoria took her time, walking closer, the steady tap of her heels echoing off the marble floor. While you were busy rewriting my life, I was busy reading yours, she said. Do you remember the name Detective Hammond? Santa Barbara, 7 years ago. Or perhaps the Morrison family in Monterey. I spoke to them both. Sienna's hand trembled. You're lying. Victoria reached into her folder, drawing out a single sheet, an old police report, folded and worn. Your first husband, Daniel Morrison, she said calmly. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. But the toxicology report showed traces of arsenic. The case was closed after you disappeared with the inheritance. Sienna's knees weakened, her voice cracking. You don't know what you're saying. Oh, but I do, Victoria continued, her tone unhurried, deliberate. And then, 3 years later, husband number 2, Robert Ellison. Another accident. Another fortune transferred to your account. You changed your name, moved states, and began again, until you found Ethan. Ethan's face went pale. Sienna, is this true? Sienna turned to him, her voice trembling. It's not what she thinks. It wasn't enough. Victoria's voice cut through the air like glass. Save your explanations for the detectives. I've already given them everything, the records, the bank transfers, even the photos. She let that sink in before adding, and they were very interested in hearing your name again, Mrs. Morrison. Sienna's body seemed to collapse under the weight of her own lies. Her knees buckled, and she reached for the edge of the table, gasping for air. You ruined me, she whispered, her words faint, hollow. No, Victoria said evenly. You did that yourself. Sienna's eyes rolled back, and before Ethan could catch her, she crumpled to the floor. The thud echoed through the house, final and merciless. Ethan knelt beside her, shaking, his voice breaking. Mom, please don't do this. She needs help. I need help. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. There was no hatred in her eyes, only sorrow, the kind reserved for something that had already died. You need consequences, she said softly, and for the first time in your life, you're going to face them without my protection. She stepped back, giving him space to carry Sienna out. The driver waited at the gate under court order, ready to escort them off the property. When the door finally closed behind them, silence returned. Deep, pure, and almost sacred. Victoria walked to the terrace, the vineyards bathed in the fading light of sunset. The valley stretched endlessly before her, calm and alive. Untouched by betrayal, she poured herself a glass of Cabernet, its deep crimson glinting like blood in the sun. For a moment, she thought of Richard, of the long years of building, of losing, of waiting. Then she lifted the glass slowly, her reflection framed by the vineyard she had reclaimed. For the first time in 8 years, Victoria Hayes toasted to herself, and that was enough.